Okay, calm down.
So I'm going to bring on our first guest. And again, as I said, this couldn't be better timing for terrible news. Josh Paul resigned from the State Department in October 2023 due to his disagreement with the Biden administration's decision to rush lethal military assistance to Israel in the context of its war on Gaza. He had previously spent over 11 years working as a director in the Bureau of Political Military Affairs, which is responsible for U.S. defense diplomacy, security assistance, and arms transfers. He previously worked on security sector reform in both Iraq and the West Bank, with additional roles in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, U.S. Army Staff, and as a military legislative assistant for a member of the U.S. House Armed Services Committee. Josh grew up between London and New York, and he is also a non-resident fellow at the organization Democracy for the Arab World Now, DAWN, and a recipient of the 2023 Callaway Award for Civic Courage. So welcome, Josh.
Thank you so much, Katie. It's great to be with you.
Yes, thank you so much for joining. And I'm so honored to be talking to you. You're extremely brave. You were one of the first people to resign over what the Biden administration is doing. And we have this breaking news, very disturbing breaking news, which is that the U.S. just authorized its biggest package of weapons to Israel since October 7th. So can you tell us about this package, Josh, and what your thoughts are on it?
Sure. So this is a set of notifications to Congress, which is the required process here, of arms sales totaling over $20 billion. They include 50 new F-15 fighter jets, as well as tens of thousands of rounds of tank ammunition, mortar ammunition. They also involve vehicles for the Israeli Defense Forces, for the ground forces, and a small number of air-to-air interceptor missiles. You know, I think coming at this time where we have seen so much devastation and frankly, so many violations of international law in the context of Israel's operations in Gaza, it's just, you know, really sickening and shameful to see our government moving forward with these sorts of sales, with these sorts of authorizations. And you add to that as well the context of this, you know, escalation that is going on in the region, the risk of war in Lebanon. You know, I think that there's just a lot to pause here and sort through, and really a dark day for American foreign policy.
And what are your recommendations? Because I know at Dawn that you urged some particular action.
So the actual truth is that with the administration moving these sales forward to Congress, there is not much that can be done to stop them. There is a mechanism that Congress has available to it called a joint resolution of disapproval. And this is the only mechanism available to Congress, really, on an expedited basis to try and prevent arms sales from going forward. It is done typically or most effectively in the Senate, where any senator can introduce a joint resolution to try and prohibit the sale from going forward, or these sales from going forward. There are several problems here. The first is that in all of the history of this process, going back to the 1970s, no joint resolution of disapproval has ever been successful in stopping any arms sale to any country. It requires a 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate, and that has never been achieved. You know, the other problem is that the administration has chosen to move these sales forward during a congressional recess. So Congress is not in session now, and they don't return until September. And the way that the administration and the executive branch reads the law, once 15 days have passed, 15 calendar days from today's notification, they can offer the contracts to Israel for signature, and then the case moves forward. From Congress's perspective, and you know, the Senate parliamentarian has ruled that no, you can still move forward with a joint resolution of disapproval, you know, even after those 15 days, which will be when the Senate is back in session. But again, you know, at that point, the contracts will already have been put out. And, you know, the likelihood of a joint resolution of disapproval actually passing and blocking these sales is extraordinarily low. So I'm sorry to say that this is it. It's happening.
Are you surprised?
No, for a few reasons. First of all, you know, it has been reported by the press for some weeks, in some cases a couple of months, that these sales were coming. So I think the only element of surprise here was the precise day on which they landed. This is also very much in keeping with the approach the Biden administration has taken throughout the last 10 months, which is that they will expedite and provide everything that Israel asks for. regardless of Israel's behavior on the ground, in fact, even turning a blind eye to Israel's behavior in Gaza. Just in the last few days, for example, we have seen the State Department decide that it will not apply the Leahy law to an Israeli Defense Forces unit called Netzah Yehuda, who were responsible for the killing of an American citizen in the West Bank, Omar Assad. And so, this impunity and this culture of impunity that the US has not only encouraged within the Israeli Defense Forces, but it's a mantle that the State Department and the Blinken State Department have taken on for themselves, that they all proceed with impunity. It is, I think, reckless. It also flies in the face of Secretary Blinken's own commitments to the international rules-based order. It is also a finger in the eye to US law, the fact that we are not applying our own laws. And yet, sadly, after 10 months, none of that is surprising.
So this is a very large question, but it's one that you have major insight into. What makes the U.S. do what it does vis-a-vis Israel? Why is the U.S. such an unwavering friend, as it likes to say? Why do they like to brag about there being no daylight between itself and the Israeli government?
Yeah, so I think it's a confluence of factors, right? And I think it's important to point out that this hasn't always been the case, that this current US-Israel relationship in this form really only dates back to the 1970s, that, Israel did not start off as a critical American ally. In fact, President Truman was skeptical of recognizing the state of Israel when that first occurred. Israel fought both its War of Independence and its 1967 war, the Six-Day War, in which it captured the West Bank, Gaza, and at that time the Sinai as well, with French and British weapons, not with American weapons. It was only 1973 in the context of the Cold War that actually it wasn't even Nixon, it was Kissinger who came to Nixon and urged him to support Israel, which America did. And it was only continuing in that context in the 1970s that Congress really began to express its full-throated support for Israel, characterized by something called the Law on Israel's Qualitative Military Edge, which I think it's not something a lot of Americans are familiar with, but it's actually written into U.S. law that we must consider Israel's qualitative military edge and its ability to defeat any adversary or combination of adversaries when we are thinking about arms transfers to any other country in the Middle East. So that is really a function of the Cold War. I think the Cold War is also important, or at least the post-Cold War moment, right? In that for 30 years, we've also had this moment of American hegemony where we can do dumb things around the world, and the price we pay is really only the price we are willing to bear without, significant geostrategic costs. I think we're coming out of that moment. And we see that our support for Israel, our unquestioning, unfettered, unconditional support, does now have costs. And I think that will shift American policy over the years to come. But I think we've been in this moment now where there has been a combination of, this moment of hegemony, absence of costs, and at the same time, this significant role in American politics of, different organizations that have been promoting and pushing, I wouldn't even say a pro-Israel view. I would say a pro-Likud or a pro, the most right-wing elements of Israel perspective, and that have been, very effective in how they engage in our political system. And I think there are also, important cultural and other ties between our countries. And of course, there are finally also growing economic ties, particularly in the tech sector. So I think it's a confluence of all of those issues. I don't think the situation is as desperate as it seems now, or as hopeless. I think that change will come to the US-Israel relationship. Change comes to every international relationship. We are now, I think, at a low point in terms of what that relationship looks like from a human rights perspective. But I don't think it is going to be like this forever. I think pushing together, we can change it, and it will change.